So today I want to talk about what I think to be one of the biggest challenges when you're building a mobile application. And that is dependencies. And let me explain you why. Imagine that you have a big application, for example, an e-commerce application. Of course that you want to focus on your business, right? So you're going to use some libraries or some dependencies to help you to build that application. So for example, you might use image loading library. You might even use a authentication library, monitoring, animations, video players, cameras, and so forth. And there is nothing wrong with that. As I said, you don't want to reinvent the wheel. You really want to focus on your core business. So that is fine. The problem happens when you're highly coupled to those libraries in different places of your application. So imagine if you have dozens of screens that directly access it, or even if you have objects of those libraries being used in different places of your architecture. You do have an architecture, right? And the problem comes when you do have to change one of those libraries. For example, authentication. Then all the places where you were accessing that library, now they are just broken because you need to replace those parts. And if you do have objects from that library being used all over the place, the harder it will get. And there are several reasons why you want to change a library. For example, maybe it's too expensive, maybe it's too cheap, maybe it's not compliant, maybe it was deprecated, or maybe because business want to change it just because they can. Doesn't matter. If that happens, you are in trouble. I've seen companies spending years trying to get rid of some dependencies. And by the time they actually manage to get rid of one dependency, another one needs to be replaced. So as you can see, this is a huge waste of time, resources, and of course, money. So you might ask, how can we fix it? Well, there isn't a silver bullet that I can just say, yeah, do that, and everything is going to be done because, well, that simply doesn't exist. But there are some things that you can do to reduce the amount of time and effort when changing those things. One of those things is the solid principles, more specifically the dependency inversion principle. So the dependency inversion principle, so the dependency inversion principle states that you should rely on abstractions, not implementation details. But what that means. What that actually means is that you should have an abstraction layer, usually that is an interface or protocol if you're doing iOS development, on top of those libraries. So instead of communicating directly with those dependencies, you're using this abstraction layer, and then the implementation details of this abstraction layer is going to communicate with your dependencies. By doing that, you're going to hopefully reduce the amount of changes required whenever you need to replace one of those libraries. But let's not be naive. I'm not saying here that if you do have this abstraction layer, then replacing a library is going to be like plug and play. That's definitely not what I'm saying. But that, as I mentioned, is going to help you to reduce the effort of doing that. And as a plus, you're going to increase the code quality of your code base because by doing so, it's going to get much easier for you to write tests for your application. Because usually it's very hard to test those applications because you need the real implementation of them. But now that you have an abstraction layer, you can use a fake implementation, and that helps a lot with testing. So remember, one of the things that can help you with that is the solid principles. And if you don't know what are the solid principles, I really recommend checking my videos. And next time you're building an application, ask yourself this question. If I have to change this library, how difficult that would be?